You're just a maid. They mocked the black nanny. Mafia Boss canceled the wedding minutes later. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The grand ballroom shimmered with gold and crystal, and the scent of expensive perfume lingered in the air. A lavish wedding, but for Maya, it was a nightmare. Dressed in her simple, maid uniform, she moved silently between the guests, a faint smile forced on her lips as she placed drinks on the marble-topped tables. The laughter and music flowed around her like a distant echo. It wasn't that she didn't belong here. No, it was that no one cared she was here. She was invisible, a servant, the hired help. And the worst part? She could hear them, the guests. The guests who were laughing and mocking her. Can you believe she's just a maid? One of them whispered loudly, their voice dripping with contempt. She doesn't even belong in a place like this. Look at her, so out of place. Maya's heart sank as she kept her eyes on the floor, her hands trembling as she carried the silver tray. It wasn't the first time she had been treated like this. She had been the subject of ridicule many times before. She had learned to ignore it, to pretend she didn't hear, but today, something felt different. Today, their voices were louder, sharper, and they cut deeper than ever. The whispers turned into laughs. You know, she should be lucky to even be here, cleaning up after us. Another guest snickered, his words so cruel that Maya's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to run, to disappear, but she couldn't. This was her job. This was what she had to do. For her mother, for her younger brother, for everything she had worked so hard for. Maya blinked back tears as she made her way through the crowd, trying to block out the voices, trying to focus on nothing but her task. But the mocking continued, and it was as if she could feel the weight of their disdain in every glance they threw her way. She had never felt so small, so humiliated in her life. The sound of a chair scraping against the floor caught her attention. She looked up, surprised, to find a man standing at the far end of the room. His tall, broad frame commanded attention, and his sharp, cold gaze seemed to take in the entire scene. The room seemed to go still as the man's eyes scanned the crowd, then locked onto her. The man's presence was undeniable. There was something about him, something that made Maya's heart skip a beat. He wasn't just another guest. He was different, powerful. The silence that followed was deafening, and in that moment, everything seemed to slow down. His eyes never left hers as he strode across the room, his every step purposeful. The guests shifted uneasily, their laughter dying down as he approached. Maya felt a chill run down her spine as he stopped in front of her, his gaze still intense. He said nothing at first, just looked at her, and then the unexpected happened. Without warning, he turned to the guests who had been mocking her, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "You've crossed the line," he said, his words low but filled with authority. "I will not tolerate such disrespect in my presence." Maya blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. Her heart raced as the man turned to her, his expression unreadable. And then, in a move that shocked everyone, he did the unthinkable. "The wedding is off," he declared. The room erupted in shocked gasps, but all Maya could do was stand there, frozen. Was this really happening? She had always felt invisible, unimportant, but this man had just made her the center of everything. And in that moment, for the first time in years, Maya felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. As the shock of the Mafia Boss's declaration rippled through the room, Maya stood frozen, unable to comprehend what had just happened. The laughter and whispers that had filled the ballroom moments ago were now replaced by an eerie silence, as if time had stopped. She could feel the weight of the eyes on her, the guests still in disbelief at the sudden turn of events. She had expected humiliation, maybe even a reprimand, but not this. Not a complete upheaval of the wedding she had been silently observing from the sidelines. Her heart raced in her chest, and her mind struggled to catch up with the reality unfolding before her. The Mafia Boss, the man who had just canceled the wedding with a few simple words, stood tall and confident in front of her, his piercing gaze now softening slightly, though still intense. His presence was undeniable, as if the entire room had bent to his will in that moment. Maya could feel his eyes on her, weighing her in a way no one had ever done before. She was used to being invisible, a mere servant in the eyes of the world. But this man, he saw her. "Are you all right?" His voice was low, but it carried a sense of authority that made her stomach flutter. Maya blinked, still trying to process the situation. Was he talking to her? She had no idea how to respond. She had never been asked that before, especially not by someone like him. I'm fine," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. She could feel the heat rise in her cheeks as she tried to gather her composure. But the man didn't seem to care about her awkwardness. He nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer, but his gaze remained steady, searching. It was then that Maya noticed the small crowd that had gathered around them, all eyes now fixed on her and the Mafia boss. They were waiting to see what would happen next. They had no idea who she was, where she came from, or why the boss had chosen to intervene on her behalf. All they knew was that something had shifted. Maya felt a strange mix of fear and gratitude. Fear, because she had no idea what this sudden attention meant for her, and gratitude, because for the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't being ignored. She wasn't being ridiculed. She wasn't just the maid. The Mafia boss turned away from her briefly, his eyes scanning the room, his sharp gaze catching every movement, every expression. It was as if he was calculating something in his mind, his next move already decided. The guests, still reeling from his earlier words, had fallen into an uncomfortable silence. Some looked at him with fear, others with confusion, but all of them were now waiting for him to act again. Maya's heart pounded in her chest as she stood there, feeling like a pawn in a game she didn't understand. But then he spoke again. "The wedding is over," he announced, his voice firm and final. "Leave. All of you. This event is finished." His words rang out across the ballroom, and for a moment, no one moved. The guests were stunned, unable to process the abruptness of the situation. Maya could see some of them starting to whisper among themselves, but the Mafia boss didn't give them a chance to argue. With a single wave of his hand, he signaled for the security to begin escorting the guests out. No one questioned him. No one dared. As the room emptied, the chaos of the wedding turned to silence. The only sounds now were the soft footsteps of the guests leaving, their murmurs fading into the distance. Maya was left standing there, still unsure of what had just happened. She looked up at the man who had caused all of this. He was still watching her, his expression unreadable. There was something almost sad in his eyes, but she couldn't tell what it was. He seemed distant, like a man who had seen too much of the world's ugliness to be moved by anything anymore. "Come with me," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. Maya blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "What?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The Mafia boss's gaze softened, but only slightly. "Come with me. You've done enough for tonight." His tone was matter of fact, like this was the only option available. And for reasons she couldn't explain, Maya found herself nodding. She didn't question him. She didn't even hesitate. For the first time in her life, someone had shown her a different kind of respect. And somehow, she knew this moment would change everything. As Maya followed the Mafia boss through the quiet halls of the mansion, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was moving too fast. The once bustling ballroom, now empty and echoing with the sounds of distant footsteps, felt like a world away from the moment she had just experienced. She had never been in a place like this before. It wasn't just the grandeur of the estate, or the luxurious furniture, or the opulent art hanging on the walls. It was the power, the air of control that surrounded the man leading her. He moved with purpose, every step calculated, every gesture measured. She had no idea where he was taking her, but she felt no fear. There was something about him that made her believe she was safe, despite the chaos of the evening. They passed through a set of heavy wooden doors into a large study. The room was dimly lit by a few lamps scattered across the space, and a massive desk sat at the center, covered in papers and old books. The walls were lined with bookshelves, and the air smelled faintly of tobacco and leather. Maya's heart was still racing, but she forced herself to focus on her surroundings. This wasn't the time to get lost in her thoughts. The Mafia boss turned to her as he closed the door behind them, his gaze steady and intense. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to one of the chairs by the desk. Maya did as she was told, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her. She had always prided herself on being calm under pressure, but tonight was different. You must be wondering why I did that, he said, his voice low, but carrying an authority that seemed to fill the room. Maya nodded slowly, her throat dry as she struggled to find the right words. I don't know what happened, she admitted quietly. I didn't expect, she trailed off, unsure of what to say. The Mafia boss studied her for a moment before speaking again. I couldn't stand to see you treated that way. No one deserves to be humiliated, not like that. Especially not someone who's just doing their job. His words, though simple, carried a weight that Maya hadn't anticipated. She had never been spoken to with such kindness, not by someone like him. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. He raised an eyebrow, almost as if surprised by her gratitude. You don't need to thank me, he replied, his voice softening just a touch. What happened tonight wasn't right. But now it's over. Maya looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. But why? Why did you do it? Why did you stop the wedding? The question had been on her mind ever since he made his announcement, and she could no longer hold it in. For the first time in her life, she wanted answers. He was silent for a moment, as if contemplating her question. Then, he leaned back in his chair, his eyes flickering toward the window. It's complicated, he said, his voice tinged with something Maya couldn't quite place. The people you saw tonight, the ones who mocked you, they're part of a world I've spent my whole life in. A world of power, wealth, and influence. But they don't understand what really matters. They think they can buy respect, control people with money, and manipulate situations to their advantage. He paused, looking at Maya with a deep, calculating gaze. I don't work that way. I never have. Maya was stunned. She had known he was powerful, but she hadn't realized just how much. But you risked everything for me, she said, her voice shaking slightly. Why? He looked at her then, and for the first time, she saw something in his eyes that wasn't just cold indifference. There was something softer, something human. Because you reminded me of something I'd forgotten, he said quietly. You reminded me of what it means to have honor, to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. Maya felt a lump form in her throat. She had never seen this side of him before, and it made her feel strange. Vulnerable, even. I don't understand, she whispered. Why me? Why did you choose to help me? He smiled slightly, though it was more of a smirk than a genuine expression. You didn't ask for anything. You didn't beg, you didn't whine. You just kept doing your job, even though they treated you like dirt. That's rare. Maya wasn't sure how to respond. The man who stood before her, someone she had once thought of as just another wealthy, untouchable person, was now offering her something more, something she never expected. Respect. But that was only the beginning. I have a proposition for you, he said suddenly, his tone shifting back to something more businesslike. I can't stand by and watch you be treated like this anymore. You're better than that. I want you to work for me, Maya. She blinked, her mind reeling from his words. What do you mean? She didn't understand. Was he offering her a new job? Something else entirely? I need someone I can trust, he said, his eyes fixed on hers. Someone who can see through the games people play. I think you're that person. Maya didn't know what to say. Her heart was pounding in her chest, but her mind was still trying to catch up. I don't know if I'm the right person for this, she admitted, her voice trembling. I've never done anything like this. He looked at her, his gaze unwavering. You don't have to know everything. You just need to know that I trust you. That's enough. Maya took a deep breath, her mind racing with possibilities. She had spent her whole life in the shadows, hidden from the world. But now, for the first time, someone was offering her a chance to step into the light. The question was, what would she do with it? As Maya sat in the study, the weight of the Mafia boss's words hung in the air. He had offered her a chance, a new life, but it wasn't just a job. It was a test of her loyalty, her values, and her courage. She had worked as a maid all her life, never imagining that one day she would be sitting in the office of someone like him, a man whose reputation sent shivers down the spines of everyone in the room. The Mafia boss was not just anyone. He was a powerful figure, one who had the means to change everything, and he had just given her an opportunity to become something more than she had ever been before. But what did it mean? What would it cost her? She had lived her life in the shadows, hiding behind a mask of invisibility, keeping her head down, doing the work no one else wanted to do. Now, she was being asked to step into the light, to work with someone who could provide her with a future she had never dreamed of. But there was a catch. She would have to leave behind everything she knew. Maya was torn. The woman who had spent years being invisible now had to make a decision that would change the course of her life. She looked at the man before her, trying to gauge what he really wanted from her. "What exactly do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice steady, though her heart was racing. The mafia boss leaned back in his chair, studying her with those dark, calculating eyes. He seemed to take a moment to measure his words carefully before speaking. "I need someone who understands loyalty, Maya. Someone who sees beyond the surface, beyond the masks people wear. I need someone I can trust. Someone who isn't afraid to make hard choices." Maya felt a shiver run down her spine. The weight of his words hit her hard. She had seen how quickly he could act, how decisively he could change the course of an entire event. The wedding he had stopped, the guests he had dismissed, all with a single command. It was clear that in his world, power was everything. But what was her role in all of this? What part did she play in his plans? "You've been underestimated your whole life," he continued, his voice smooth, almost coaxing. "You've been treated like you don't matter, like you don't belong. But I'm telling you now, Maya, you have the potential to be much more than that." She swallowed, her mind racing. Could she trust him? Could she trust herself? The fear that had once paralyzed her was still there, lurking in the back of her mind. She had spent so many years being silent, being invisible, and now she was being asked to step into a world where power, respect, and loyalty were everything. She wasn't sure she was ready for it. But then she thought about the things she had lost, the years spent cleaning other people's homes, the struggles she had faced just to make ends meet. She thought about her family, her mother, and her brother. They had always depended on her, and now she had a chance to do something more, something that could change everything for them. "What do you want me to do?" she asked again, her voice more confident this time. The mafia boss smiled, a small, almost imperceptible smile that seemed to hold a world of meaning. "I want you to help me with something," he said, his voice lowering slightly. "There are people I need to deal with, and I need someone who isn't afraid to get their hands dirty." Maya's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea what he was asking her to do, but something told her that this wasn't going to be easy. "What kind of people?" she asked, her curiosity getting the better of her. The mafia boss stood up, pacing slowly around the room as if weighing his next words. "The kind of people who think they can manipulate situations for their own gain. People who think they can control the narrative, but they don't understand the rules of this game." Maya felt a chill run through her. She had no experience in dealing with people like that, but she knew enough about the world to understand that these were not the kind of people she wanted to cross. "What do you need from me?" she asked again, more urgently now. The mafia boss stopped pacing and turned to face her. "I need you to help me take them down," he said, his voice cold and decisive. "But I won't ask you to do it alone. I'll be right there beside you. But I need someone I can count on." Maya nodded slowly, her mind still reeling from the weight of his words. She didn't fully understand what he was asking, but one thing was clear. She was no longer the invisible maid she had once been. She was being thrust into a world of power, danger, and betrayal. And there was no going back. "All right," she said finally, her voice firm, her resolve hardening. "I'll do it." The mafia boss gave her a sharp nod. "Good. I knew I could count on you." As he spoke, Maya felt the shift in the room, the air thick with the unspoken understanding between them. This was it. Her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with it. The days that followed Maya's decision were a blur. She had never imagined she would be pulled so deeply into a world that seemed so far removed from the one she had known. Every moment felt like a test, each new challenge pushing her further out of her comfort zone. The mafia boss, whose name she still hadn't dared to ask, kept his word. He introduced her to a world of strategy, power, and danger, things she had only heard about in whispers. Maya was no longer just the maid, the invisible woman working behind the scenes. She was now an active part of something much bigger than herself. Each day she spent with him, she learned more about the inner workings of his empire. He was ruthless when he needed to be, but there was something more to him than the cold, calculating persona everyone saw. There were moments when he showed a side of himself that seemed almost human, almost vulnerable. But those moments were rare, fleeting. He was a man who had built his life on control, and he trusted very few people. Maya wasn't sure if she had earned that trust yet, but she was doing her best to prove herself. She was determined not to let him down. One evening, after a long day of learning the ropes and meeting people from different parts of his world, Maya found herself in the study again, the same room where everything had changed for her. She had grown accustomed to the quiet, tense atmosphere that filled the space whenever he was around. He was sitting at his desk, his back to her, looking over some documents. She hesitated for a moment before walking toward him. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her voice steady but cautious. He didn't turn around immediately. When he did, there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something that made Maya's heart skip a beat. "Everything is fine," he said simply, his tone betraying nothing. But there was something about the way he said it that made Maya feel like she wasn't getting the full picture. She took a deep breath and decided to push forward. "You've been quiet lately," she observed. "Is there something on your mind?" The Mafia boss regarded her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, as if making up his mind, he leaned back in his chair and looked at her. "There are always things on my mind, Maya," he replied, his voice low, almost like a warning. "This world, it's not as simple as it seems. People play games, they lie, they betray each other. And sometimes, the people you trust the most are the ones who hurt you the most." Maya felt a chill run down her spine. She wasn't sure if he was speaking about the people they were dealing with, or if he was talking about himself. "Is that why you asked me to help you?" she asked softly. "Because you don't trust anyone else?" His gaze softened for a fraction of a second before he quickly masked it. "I don't trust easily," he admitted, his voice almost imperceptible. "But there's something about you, Maya. You don't play the game like everyone else. You don't pretend to be something you're not. That's what I need right now." His words hung in the air, and Maya felt a warmth spread through her chest. She wasn't sure what he saw in her, but the fact that he was being so honest with her made her feel like she had a place in his world. She had a role to play, and she was determined to fulfill it. "I won't let you down," she said firmly. He nodded, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "I know," he replied quietly. "But you have to understand something, Maya. Once you're in this world, there's no turning back. You'll have to make decisions that will change everything. And sometimes, those decisions won't be easy." Maya swallowed, the weight of his words sinking in. She had already made her choice, but she hadn't fully grasped what it meant to be part of his world. She was learning quickly, but she still had a lot to figure out. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady. "I know what I'm getting into." The Mafia boss studied her for a long moment before standing up. "Good. Because from now on, there's no room for hesitation. You either stand with me, or you stand against me. And I don't plan on losing anyone who stands with me." Maya nodded, feeling the gravity of his words settle in her chest. She wasn't sure where this journey would take her, but she knew one thing for certain. There was no going back. She had made her choice, and now, she had to live with the consequences. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty, and Maya couldn't shake the feeling that her life had shifted into a new, unpredictable direction. She had made her choice, but the weight of that decision was still settling in. Every interaction with the Mafia boss left her with more questions than answers, and yet, she couldn't stop herself from being drawn into his world. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, his presence filled the room. It was like he didn't just command attention, he demanded it. Maya had never been in a position like this before. She had never had someone rely on her the way he seemed to rely on her now. And despite the fear, despite the unknowns that loomed before her, she found herself slowly starting to understand why he had chosen her. It wasn't just her ability to be invisible, to fade into the background. It was her resilience, her ability to keep going despite everything that had been thrown her way. Maya had always survived by staying unnoticed, but now, she was stepping into the light. The Mafia boss kept his word, involving her in more of his operations, teaching her how to navigate the intricate and dangerous world he controlled. He didn't expect her to be perfect. He didn't expect her to know everything. But he did expect her to think, to make quick decisions, and to trust her instincts. And that's exactly what she did. They were planning something big. A move against one of their rivals, a powerful figure who had been making waves in the underworld. Maya wasn't sure of all the details, but she knew it was going to be dangerous. The Mafia boss didn't do things halfway. When he made a move, it was decisive and final. Maya sat in his office, the same office where everything had changed for her, staring at a map spread across the desk. He was going over the plan, and for the first time, He had invited her to participate in the discussion. "This is where it all comes to a head," he said, pointing to a marked location on the map. "Our rival is holding a private meeting tomorrow night, and it's our chance to move in." Maya nodded, her eyes scanning the details of the plan. It was risky, there was no denying that. But she knew this was her chance to prove herself. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice steady, her gaze focused. The Mafia boss looked at her, his eyes sharp, calculating. "I need you to be ready," he said simply. "You'll be with me when we move. There's no room for hesitation, Maya. This is the moment." She felt a chill run through her. This was the real thing. This wasn't just another job or another day of cleaning. This was something that would change everything. But it was too late to turn back now. Maya's heart raced, but she didn't let her fear show. She had made her choice, and now she had to follow through. The night of the operation arrived quickly. Maya was on edge, her mind running through the details over and over again. They had done their prep work, gathered the intel, and now it was time to move. She stood in the darkened hallway of the Mafia boss's mansion, her heart pounding in her chest. He was walking ahead of her, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. "Stay close," he said, his voice low. Maya nodded, her hands trembling slightly. She couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. The uncertainty, the danger, it was all real now. They moved through the night, silent and unseen, like shadows in the darkness. The anticipation was suffocating, but Maya kept her focus. She was with him, and that meant she had a role to play. They arrived at their destination, an upscale, discreet venue on the outskirts of the city. The meeting was happening inside. Maya could feel the tension in the air as the Mafia boss led her through the back entrance. She stayed close behind him, ready for whatever was to come. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with secrecy and power. The men at the meeting were powerful, dangerous, and they didn't take kindly to outsiders. Maya was acutely aware of every move, every sound. She was stepping into a world she had never imagined, but there was no turning back now. As they entered the room, the energy shifted. The Mafia boss's presence commanded the room immediately. All eyes turned to him, and Maya felt a rush of adrenaline. This was the moment. The stakes were high, and she was a part of it. She followed his lead as he addressed the group, his voice firm and unyielding. "Gentlemen," he said, his gaze sweeping over the room. "It's time to make things clear." Maya didn't know exactly what was happening, but she could see the power play unfolding before her. She had never been a part of something like this, but now, she was right in the middle of it. The tension was palpable, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Suddenly, there was a shift. The Mafia boss moved, his body language shifting from controlled to explosive. "We're not here to negotiate," he said coldly, his voice ringing with finality. The men in the room stiffened, and Maya could feel the temperature in the air drop. It was happening. The power struggle was real. Maya watched as the events unfolded, her heart in her throat. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure. Her life was never going to be the same. The tension in the room was thick, like an electric current in the air. Maya stood frozen, her gaze locked on the Mafia boss as he addressed the group of men who had gathered around the large, polished table. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but there was no turning back now. She had made her choice, and now, there was no escape from this world she had stepped into. The atmosphere was charged with hostility, each man in the room exuding power, their eyes flickering with suspicion and calculating intent. It was clear that this wasn't just a meeting. It was a battle for control, and the stakes were high. Maya could feel the Mafia boss's presence in the room like a force of nature. His calm, measured demeanor contrasted sharply with the growing tension. He was in control, and it was obvious to everyone present. But Maya couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Something was coming, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. The Mafia boss spoke again, his voice calm, but carrying an undeniable authority. "We're not here to negotiate," he repeated, his words echoing through the room. The men around the table stiffened, their eyes narrowing in response. Maya watched, feeling the weight of their gazes as the room seemed to hold its breath. "This meeting," the Mafia boss continued, "is about something much more important. It's about loyalty, and it's about power." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. Maya could see the subtle shifts in the faces around the table. Some men bristled at the challenge, while others seemed to take the words in stride. The tension was palpable. "If you're not with me," the Mafia boss said, his voice growing darker, "then you're against me. And I don't tolerate betrayal." Maya felt a chill run down her spine. She had never seen him like this before, so direct, so commanding. He was a man who didn't just lead, he demanded absolute loyalty. She was beginning to understand the weight of what it meant to be a part of his world. The men around the table exchanged glances, but none of them dared speak up. It was clear that they all understood the unspoken rule. Crossing the Mafia boss meant risking everything. Maya's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the scene unfold. This was no longer just a matter of business, it was personal. She could see the fear in the eyes of some of the men, but there were others who remained calm, perhaps too calm. One man at the far end of the table, a sharp-dressed figure with dark hair and a smug smile, seemed to be testing the boss, his gaze defiant. Maya could feel the tension rise as the man spoke, his voice dripping with arrogance. "You think you can control everything, don't you?" he said, his words slow and deliberate. "You're not the only one with power in this room." The room seemed to hold its breath as the Mafia boss's eyes narrowed. Maya could sense the shift in the air. The tension in the room was now unbearable, the silence deafening. She had never seen the boss's calm demeanor slip, but in that moment, something in his eyes changed. His expression darkened, his lips pressing into a thin line as he leaned forward slightly. "You think you can challenge me?" he said, his voice low, like the rumble of a storm. The man who had spoken was suddenly very aware of the danger he had just invoked. His smile faltered for just a moment, but it was enough for Maya to see it. The Mafia boss didn't have to raise his voice to intimidate. He didn't need to make threats. His very presence was enough to make anyone second-guess their position. "I suggest you reconsider your words," the Mafia boss said, his voice now cold and firm. The man seemed to shrink back, his arrogance replaced by a flicker of doubt. Maya watched as the power dynamic in the room shifted. The other men, once uncertain, now seemed to settle into a silent agreement. The man who had challenged the Mafia boss lowered his gaze, his bravado completely gone. It was clear that the boss had won this round without even lifting a finger. Maya felt a wave of respect for him, though it was tinged with fear. She was beginning to understand the depths of his power. But there was something else in his eyes now, something that made her question everything. The man who had spoken was now silent, and the room was still once again. The Mafia boss turned to Maya, his gaze softening just a little, though the tension in the room remained. "This is how things are," he said quietly, almost to himself. "In this world, weakness isn't tolerated, and loyalty is everything." Maya nodded slowly, the weight of his words settling in. She had never imagined she would be here, part of a world where loyalty meant more than life itself. But now she was, and she had to prove herself. The Mafia boss stood up, his command of the room unshaken. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying an undeniable authority. "This is just the beginning. We're moving forward, and I expect everyone to fall in line." With that, the meeting was adjourned. The men stood up, their movements stiff and respectful, as if they were acknowledging the Mafia boss's dominance. Maya remained in her seat, still processing everything that had just transpired. She had made a choice, and now she was in this world for good. There was no turning back. As she followed the Mafia boss out of the room, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the decisions that were ahead. She had been given a place in this world, and now, she had to prove that she deserved it. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Maya had crossed a line, and now there was no going back. The Mafia boss had made it clear. This world was unforgiving, and only the strongest would survive. Maya had proven herself in his eyes, but she knew the challenges were only just beginning. She spent her days immersed in the underworld she had been thrust into, learning the ropes, understanding the intricacies of power, and how to navigate the fine line between loyalty and betrayal. The Mafia boss kept her close, involving her in his plans, his strategies, and his decisions. He didn't treat her like a mere maid anymore. She was his right hand, a trusted ally in a world where trust was rare. But despite the respect he showed her, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that she was just another pawn in his grand game. She had seen the way he operated, calm, calculated, and ruthless. But there was a coldness to him that never quite disappeared. He was a man who had built his empire on power and fear, and Maya couldn't help but wonder how much of that power was truly real. One evening, Maya was sitting in the study, going over some files when the door opened, and the Mafia boss stepped inside. His presence seemed to fill the room, as it always did. He didn't speak right away, but his gaze locked onto hers. She met his eyes, trying to keep her composure, but she couldn't deny the tension that filled the space between them. "We're moving forward," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Everything we've been planning, it's time to act. I need you to be ready." Maya's heart skipped a beat. She had known this moment was coming, but hearing it from him made everything feel real. This wasn't just another job. This was their next big move, one that could change everything. "What's the plan?" she asked, her voice steady despite the nervous energy coursing through her. The Mafia boss walked over to the desk and laid out a detailed map of the city. "Our rivals are holding a meeting tomorrow," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "This is the opportunity we've been waiting for. If we take them down now, we'll control the entire network. No more games." Maya nodded, her mind racing. She could feel the weight of his words. This wasn't just about business anymore. It was personal. The power struggle was about to escalate, and they were about to make their move. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, looking up at him. He met her gaze, his eyes sharp and calculating. "I need you to gather intel. Be discreet. I need you to get close to the people in that room tomorrow. Get information, anything that can help us." Maya's pulse quickened. This was her chance to prove herself once again, but the danger was higher than ever. The stakes were unimaginable. If she failed, it wouldn't just be a loss, it would be a catastrophe. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. "I'll do it," she said, her voice firm, determined. He gave her a slight nod, almost approving. "Good. I knew you would." But even as he said those words, Maya couldn't help but feel the unease creeping in. There was something about this mission that felt different, something that made her question just how far she was willing to go. The next day arrived quickly, and Maya found herself preparing for the most dangerous task she had ever undertaken. The Mafia boss had given her specific instructions, and she knew what she had to do. She had to blend in, to act as if she belonged. She had to walk a tightrope between loyalty and survival. As she entered the meeting venue, the tension in the air was palpable. The room was filled with people, powerful, dangerous people, each of them playing their own game. Maya kept her head down, moving carefully through the crowd. She could feel the weight of their eyes on her, but she didn't falter. She had a job to do, and she couldn't afford to let her nerves get the best of her. She took a deep breath and focused on the task at hand. She had to be smart, calculating, just like the Mafia boss. As she made her way through the room, her eyes darted from one person to the next, taking in every detail, every movement. She was looking for something, anything, that would give her the edge. It was a dangerous game, and she knew it. But the more she observed, the more she realized just how much control she was starting to feel. For the first time in a long while, Maya felt like she wasn't just an observer in her own life. She was a player, and she was ready to make her move. She slipped through the crowd, gathering information, listening to whispers, piecing together the puzzle. The tension in the room was rising, and she knew the moment was coming. The Mafia boss had been right. This was the time to act. But as she collected the last piece of the puzzle, a thought crossed her mind. Was she really ready for what was about to happen next? She glanced across the room, meeting the Mafia boss's gaze from across the crowd. His eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time, Maya saw something in them that she couldn't quite understand. Was it pride? Was it approval? Or was it something darker? She couldn't tell, but one thing was certain. The game was far from over. And Maya was ready to play. The room was thick with tension, as if everyone could feel the storm that was about to break. Maya had just gathered the final pieces of information she needed. The Mafia boss's plan was in motion, and everything hinged on the choices she made in the coming hours. She had done what he asked, staying in the shadows, blending in, observing, and listening. But now, the time for stealth was over. It was time for action. She glanced over at him from across the room. His gaze was fixed on the group of men around the table, but he wasn't looking at them. He was looking past them, as if already envisioning the next move in the game. Maya took a deep breath. She had never been a part of something this big, this dangerous. The stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. One wrong move, and everything would fall apart. But she had come this far, and there was no turning back. She walked across the room, her steps purposeful but measured. She had a role to play now. As she neared the Mafia boss, he looked up, his eyes catching hers. There was no warmth in his expression, but there didn't need to be. There was something deeper in his gaze. A silent acknowledgement. "It's time," he said quietly, as if he had been waiting for her to approach. Maya nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She had done everything she could to prepare for this moment, but she still felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her. "What now?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tension. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood up, moving to a nearby shelf and picking up a file. He flipped it open, his fingers moving with precision as he scanned the documents inside. "This," he said, finally turning toward her, "is where everything changes." The file contained detailed information about their rivals, their weaknesses, and their next steps. Maya understood immediately. This wasn't just about taking down a rival. It was about reshaping the power dynamic in the city. It was about taking control. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice low. Maya met his gaze, her heart racing. She didn't have to think about her answer. "I'm ready," she said, her voice firm. She had made her choice, and there was no turning back now. He gave a slight nod of approval before turning back to the room. He started issuing orders to his men, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. Maya stayed close, absorbing every detail, every command. She could feel the adrenaline building in her veins as the plan unfolded. This was her world now, and she had to move with the same precision, the same ruthlessness that the Mafia boss exhibited every day. The minutes stretched out, each one feeling longer than the last. It wasn't until the first group of men moved into position that Maya realized just how much was at stake. There was no room for hesitation, no time for doubt. The plan had to work, or they would all fall. She stayed close to the boss, moving in tandem with him, feeling the weight of every step, every decision. They reached the venue where the meeting was being held, an old, dilapidated building on the outskirts of the city. Maya could feel the tension in the air as they approached, the reality of the situation settling in. This was it. This was the moment that would either secure their power or cost them everything. "Stay sharp," the Mafia boss murmured as they neared the entrance. Maya nodded, her senses heightened. She was ready. She had to be. The door opened with a soft creak, and they entered the building, the darkness swallowing them whole. The air was thick with the smell of damp wood and dust. As they moved through the hallways, Maya couldn't help but notice the eerie silence that surrounded them. It was like walking into the eye of a storm. The moment they entered the main room, everything changed. The men who had gathered there were surprised, but not enough to be caught off guard. Their eyes flickered with recognition, and the tension in the room spiked. The Mafia boss didn't waste time. He stepped forward, his voice cutting through the silence like a whip. "Gentlemen," he began, his tone calm but commanding. "It's time to end this." Maya could see the reactions of the men around the table. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others clenched their fists, knowing what was coming. The boss wasn't here to negotiate. He was here to claim what was his. The atmosphere was thick with hostility, and Maya could feel the weight of every eye in the room. The boss's gaze swept over them, his eyes piercing through each one of them as if he could see their thoughts. "This is how it ends," he said, his voice cold and unwavering. Maya stood beside him, her role clear in her mind. She had done everything she could to gather the intel, and now it was time for action. The moment was fragile, like a single thread holding everything together. One wrong move, and the entire plan could unravel. As the tension reached its peak, the Mafia boss made his move. He reached into his jacket, pulling out a file with the final details of their operation. Maya's heart raced as she watched the men around the table react, their faces a mix of fear and realization. They had underestimated him, and now it was too late. The room was silent, except for the sound of pages flipping, the final step in the game. Maya felt a surge of pride as the boss took control, his every move calculated, his every word commanding attention. This was the world she had stepped into. This was the man she had chosen to follow. And as the final pieces of the plan fell into place, she knew that nothing would ever be the same. The tension in the room had reached its breaking point. Maya stood beside the Mafia boss, her heart racing as she watched the rival men slowly crumble under the pressure. Their faces, once confident and defiant, were now twisted with fear and realization. They had underestimated him, underestimated the sheer force of his will. The boss moved with quiet precision, his every gesture calculated. Maya had seen it before, but never so up close. His control over the situation was unnerving, and she couldn't help but marvel at how effortlessly he commanded the room. The other men around the table were silent, all of them now looking at the boss like they were cornered animals. The power dynamics had shifted completely, and Maya felt herself drawn deeper into this world, a world where one man's word was law and loyalty was everything. As the boss laid out his final words, his voice cool but filled with authority, Maya could see the men around the table squirming in their seats. Some of them tried to speak, to defend themselves, but the Mafia boss cut them off with a simple wave of his hand. "Enough," he said, his voice low and chilling. "You had your chance. You think you can walk away from this, but there are consequences." The silence that followed was deafening. Maya watched, her breath held, as the men around the table exchanged nervous glances, each one wondering what would happen next. The boss didn't seem to care about their fear. His eyes were cold, calculating. He had already decided their fate. "You're done," the boss continued, his voice sharp. "I don't make threats. I make decisions." He turned to Maya then, his gaze softening for a moment, as if to reassure her. "It's time to clean up." Maya nodded, her hands clenched at her sides. She wasn't just an observer anymore. She was part of this. She had made her choice, and there was no turning back. The men around the table had failed. They had underestimated the Mafia boss, and now they would pay the price. But the moment wasn't over. The boss stood up, walking toward one of the men who had attempted to challenge him. He stood over him like a predator over prey, his shadow stretching long and dark across the room. "You've been a problem for too long," the boss said, his voice barely a whisper, but the weight of his words hung heavily in the air. Maya watched the man's face pale as the realization hit him. He had been caught in a web, a trap that he had no hope of escaping. The boss didn't need to raise his voice. His presence alone was enough to crush his opponents. The man tried to speak, but his words faltered, and Maya could see the fear in his eyes. There was no escape for him now. The Mafia boss was in control, and nothing would change that. Maya's pulse quickened as the room filled with the sound of the men's nervous shuffling. They were all realizing what had just happened, what they had been a part of. It wasn't just a power shift, it was a complete takeover. The Mafia boss had claimed victory, and no one could challenge him now. "Take them out," the boss said suddenly, his voice commanding. "Let them see what happens when they cross me." Maya felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She had never been involved in something like this before. But as the men were escorted out of the room, their heads hung low, Maya understood one thing with absolute certainty. This was the life she had chosen. There was no going back now. The Mafia boss had made his move, and the world would never be the same. "You did well," the boss said to Maya, his voice low and appreciative. Maya turned to look at him, surprised by the praise. "Thank you," she said softly. But there was no time for gratitude. The night wasn't over yet. "We have work to do," he said, his gaze steady. "This is just the beginning." Maya nodded, feeling a rush of determination. She had proven herself, but this was only the start. There would be more to come, more challenges, more decisions to make. And she would be ready. The Mafia boss had given her a place in his world, and she intended to prove she belonged. As they left the room together, Maya couldn't help but feel the weight of her decision. She had stepped into a world of power, danger, and loyalty, and there was no turning back. The days following the event were filled with a quiet tension that seemed to hover over everything. Maya had done what was expected of her, and yet, the weight of the actions that had unfolded weighed heavily on her. She had entered the Mafia boss's world with no hesitation, but now, she was beginning to understand the full extent of the choices she had made. The victory they had secured was just the beginning. There was always another rival to defeat, another move to make, another battle to fight. The Mafia boss, though, showed no signs of slowing down. He worked tirelessly, moving through meetings, speaking with allies, strategizing for the next step. Maya watched him, taking in his every move. His life was one of constant motion, of never allowing weakness to show, of never resting on his laurels. He was a man defined by his power, and Maya was now part of that. It was both thrilling and terrifying. One evening, after a particularly intense meeting, the boss invited her to join him for a quiet dinner. It wasn't something that happened often. She had seen him surrounded by people, giving orders, controlling the flow of information. But tonight, he was different. There was no agenda, no strategy to be discussed. It was just the two of them. Maya found herself sitting across from him at a small, intimate table in his private dining room. The soft glow of the candles cast flickering shadows across the room. The silence was comfortable, but it also made her aware of the growing tension between them. It wasn't a tension of conflict. It was a tension of something unspoken, something that had been building ever since she had stepped into his world. "You've done well," he said, his voice soft but filled with sincerity. Maya wasn't sure how to respond. She wasn't used to receiving praise from him. "Thank you," she said simply, looking down at her plate. The food was excellent, but she wasn't hungry. Her mind kept racing, thinking about everything that had happened. The choices, the consequences, the weight of it all. She felt the pressure of his gaze on her, but she didn't look up. "You don't need to thank me," he continued, his tone light but still filled with authority. "I know you didn't do this for praise, but you've proven yourself." Maya finally met his eyes. She had been waiting for this moment, waiting for him to acknowledge her, to see her as more than just a maid. But what did it mean now? What did she want from this world? "I don't want to be just another pawn in your game," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I want to make a difference. I want to do more than just follow orders." The words felt like they had been building up inside of her for weeks. She had always been someone who just did what was asked of her, never questioning, never pushing back. But now, with everything that had happened, she realized that she wanted more. She wanted to be part of something bigger, something that mattered. The Mafia boss looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, finally, he spoke. "You're not just a pawn, Maya," he said slowly. "I see potential in you. You have the ability to do more. But this world, it's not kind to those who show weakness. It's not kind to those who hesitate." Maya nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She understood what he was saying. To succeed in this world, she had to be strong, unyielding. But could she do that? Could she really become the person he saw in her? "You're right," she said quietly. "I can't afford to hesitate." The Mafia boss smiled then, though it was a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Good," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Because this is just the beginning, Maya. There are bigger things ahead, and I need someone I can trust. Someone who understands what it takes to survive in this world." Maya felt a surge of determination well up inside her. This was what she had wanted. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She wasn't going to be just another face in the crowd. She wasn't going to be invisible anymore. She was going to prove herself. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady, unwavering. "I'll do whatever it takes." The Mafia boss nodded, his eyes gleaming with approval. "I know you will," he said, his tone deepening. "And that's why I'm giving you a chance. You've earned it." Maya felt a rush of pride, but also a deep sense of responsibility. The path she had chosen was not an easy one. It would require everything she had, her strength, her intelligence, and her loyalty. But for the first time in her life, she felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. The rest of the dinner passed in relative silence, the weight of their conversation hanging between them. When it was over, the Mafia boss rose from the table, signaling the end of the evening. "You've earned my trust, Maya," he said as he walked toward the door. "And that trust will be tested. But I have no doubt you'll succeed." Maya stood as well, her heart still racing from the intensity of the conversation. She had made her choice, and there was no turning back. The next steps were hers to take. And with the Mafia boss by her side, she was ready for whatever came next. The following weeks felt like a trial by fire for Maya. After her dinner with the Mafia boss, things started moving quickly. She was no longer just part of the background, no longer invisible. She was now at the center of the storm, involved in every major decision, every key operation. There was no turning back. Maya spent her days by the Mafia boss's side, absorbing everything. She became his shadow, attending meetings with him, learning the intricacies of the empire he had built. She saw the way people feared him, the respect he commanded without even raising his voice. She was starting to see just how deeply the boss had ingrained himself into the fabric of this world. Power was a dangerous thing, and those who held it, like him, were often more alone than anyone could imagine. Maya had learned this quickly. It was one thing to have power, but it was another thing to trust anyone enough to share it with them. The Mafia boss trusted few people, but he was starting to trust her. She could see it in the way he looked at her. His guard was still up, but there was something else there now, something that went beyond the professional. It was a connection, a mutual understanding. And while Maya wasn't sure exactly where this would lead, she was beginning to understand the world she was a part of. One day, the boss called her into his office, his expression as unreadable as ever. "I've been watching you, Maya," he said, his voice low and steady. "And I have to admit, you've done well." Maya stood a little straighter, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The moment when he would either confirm her place in his world or push her back into the shadows. She couldn't afford to show any doubt. "Thank you," she said, her voice firm but with a slight tremor she couldn't quite control. He didn't acknowledge her thanks immediately, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. After a long moment, he spoke again, his voice still calm, but with an edge. "I need someone I can trust. Someone who's not afraid to make decisions." Maya nodded. She had made plenty of decisions in the past few weeks, many of them difficult ones. But this was different. This was the kind of decision that would shape the future, not just of her life, but of everyone in this world. The boss leaned forward, his gaze never leaving hers. "I'm giving you a task," he said, his tone commanding. "There's someone who's been a thorn in my side for too long. It's time for them to disappear." Maya's heart skipped a beat. She knew exactly what he was asking. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was about making sure no one crossed the line with him. Maya swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling on her shoulders. This was her chance, her test. This was where she would prove herself. "I understand," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside her. "What do you need me to do?" The boss stood up, walking to the window and looking out into the city. "I need you to handle this. You'll be the one to bring them in. No one will question you." Maya's pulse quickened. He was trusting her with this. He was putting her in a position of power. And yet, she could feel the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just about following orders. This was about taking control. "I'll do it," she said, her voice strong. He turned back to her then, and for a moment, their eyes locked. There was something in his gaze that softened, just for a fraction of a second, before he turned back to his usual cold demeanor. "I know you will," he said simply. Maya could feel the weight of his trust in her, and it was both a relief and a burden. She had earned it, but she knew what it meant. There was no room for error in this world. As she left his office, Maya's mind raced. She was about to take on the most important task of her life. She had been given a chance, and she couldn't afford to waste it. There was no going back now. This was the moment that would define her place in the Mafia boss's world. The decision she made now would echo throughout everything that followed. She had to get it right. There would be no second chances. Maya stood in front of the large mirror in her room, taking a deep breath. She had changed since she first entered this world. She wasn't the same person who had been invisible, hiding in the background. She was part of something bigger now, and she was ready for whatever came next. The night was quiet, the city's lights flickering like distant stars as Maya sat in the back of the black SUV, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. The task she had been given was complete. The man who had been a thorn in the Mafia boss's side was no more, and with his disappearance, the power dynamics in the underworld had shifted yet again. Maya could feel the weight of her actions pressing on her, but she knew one thing for certain. There was no turning back. She had crossed a line, but in doing so, she had proven herself. The Mafia boss trusted her now, and that trust was a dangerous thing to hold. She had seen his power firsthand, how effortlessly he moved, how swiftly he brought people to their knees. She had felt the coldness of his decisions, the finality in his voice when he gave orders. And yet, in the quiet moments when it was just the two of them, she had also seen another side to him. A side that was not just a ruthless kingpin, but a man who carried the burden of the empire he had built. Maya had stepped into his world, and she was beginning to understand it better now. The silence between them was comfortable, but Maya couldn't help but wonder where this path would take her. The Mafia boss had made it clear that this was just the beginning, that there were bigger things ahead. As the SUV turned into the private driveway of the mansion, she couldn't shake the feeling that more challenges awaited her. She was no longer just a maid, no longer invisible. She was part of something far bigger, and there was no turning back. The car came to a stop in front of the mansion, and the door opened almost immediately. Maya stepped out, feeling the cool night air on her skin. The Mafia boss was already at the entrance, waiting for her. He said nothing as she walked toward him, but his eyes met hers with that same intensity. There was no smile, no gesture of reassurance, just that quiet, knowing gaze. "You did well," he said simply. His voice was low, but there was a hint of something like approval behind it. Maya nodded, though she could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The world she had entered was unforgiving, and every decision she made from now on would have consequences. "Thank you," she said quietly, but the words felt almost inadequate. She had done what he asked, but what did it mean now? The boss seemed to sense her hesitation. "You've earned your place here, Maya," he said, his voice softer than usual. "But this is just the start. What we've done tonight is just one piece of the puzzle. We're playing a long game." Maya's heart skipped a beat. "What's next?" she asked, her voice steady despite the growing anxiety she felt. The Mafia boss didn't answer immediately. He turned, motioning for her to follow him inside. As they walked through the grand entrance, the sound of the mansion's silence filled the space around them. Maya could feel the weight of the walls, the sense of power that the house seemed to exude. She had never been in a place like this before, so full of history, so full of secrets. They entered the study, and the boss gestured for Maya to sit. "There's something I need to show you," he said, his tone serious. Maya sat down, her mind racing. What could he possibly want her to see? He pulled a file from the desk and opened it. Inside were photos, documents, and plans, maps detailing the next steps in the boss's strategy. She could see the scope of it now. The rivals they had defeated were only the beginning. There were bigger targets, more power to be claimed. The game was far from over. "You're part of this now, Maya," the boss said, his voice quiet but firm. "The decisions we make, the moves we take, they'll affect everything. And I need you to be ready. This isn't a game for the faint of heart." Maya looked at the plans before her. It was a lot to take in, and the responsibility felt immense. But she knew this was what she had signed up for. She had made her choice, and now she had to see it through. "I'm ready," she said, her voice resolute. The boss looked at her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, there was nothing but silence between them. Then he spoke. "Good. Because in this world, there's no room for weakness. Only those who are willing to make hard choices will survive." Maya nodded, understanding the gravity of what he was saying. She wasn't just in this world. She was becoming part of it, whether she liked it or not. The path ahead would be filled with challenges, dangers, and choices that could change everything. But she was ready for it. She had to be. As the night stretched on, Maya stayed in the study, reviewing the plans, her mind racing. With the implications of what was to come, she had been brought into this world, and now she would have to fight for her place in it. The boss had given her a chance, and it was up to her to prove she deserved it. There was no turning back. She had crossed the point of no return, and she was ready for whatever came next. Get ready to dive into captivating romance stories filled with intrigue, suspense, and unexpected twists. This narrative follows Maya as she enters a world of power, danger, and loyalty, where every decision could change her life forever. In this thrilling journey, Maya steps into the world of the Mafia boss, proving her worth and earning his trust as she becomes deeply involved in the high-stakes operations that shape the underworld. As she faces betrayals and makes tough choices, Maya learns the true meaning of loyalty and power in this intense, fast-paced story. Love and danger intertwine in these romance stories, keeping you on the edge of your seat as the stakes rise with each chapter. Join Maya as she navigates the complex world of power, where romance and betrayal are always a heartbeat away. If you love romance stories that blend high tension with deep character development, this one will leave you hooked. Stay with us to experience a thrilling ride of loyalty, power, and love in these unforgettable romance stories.